look, you're a constant learner. I think that's the big lesson, right? It's when you're starting out in business. When you're starting out in business or you're a mature business, we always have to keep learning. And your point is exactly right, Emil. I love the point actually, because look, the income statement is a piece of paper, but the bottom line is the sum total of all the processes, whether it's sales or cost of goods or procurement or HR. It's a sum total of how effective all those processes is, which results in a bottom line, right? If the bottom line isn't where it's supposed to be or where you expect it to be, you've got to diagnose why that's the case in your processes, right?
Yeah, no, that's true, right? And that's what sort of moves the needle. Yeah, where a lot of the books I remember, I didn't go through an MBA program, but have plenty of friends who did. So I used to just borrow all of their books to just make sure that I was reading the same stuff that they had read. And it was always useful to sort of know the theory of things that already exist, methods and models that already exist, so you
Sure.
don't have to be constantly reinventing the wheel. So that was always helpful too.
Okay, so you talked about cash flow, obviously a crucial part of early stage and growth. So managing cash flow is crucial. Okay, how did you become proficient in cash flow management, and what strategies have you found to be effective?
So I couldn't agree with you more, right? I think the statistically speaking thing, most companies, most startups fail because they run out of money, right? So uh, that is priority number one at the beginning is don't run out of money, right?
Cash
Too
is
soon.
king.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, with all honesty, I think that the most important concept that everybody running a startup must own is know your stuff, right? Just knowing your numbers, left and right and up and down. That I think it's incredible how often I found, even on my own teams, uh, people that just didn't know, right? And that inevitably makes people to sort of talk and make decisions and spend time just sort of doing things without really knowing the facts. And that is super dangerous and extremely inefficient and confusing. So knowing your stuff and knowing your numbers by heart seems like an obvious thing. But if you're paying attention to the news and you're following, for instance, the FTX trial, you know that that can easily get, very crazy, right? Where people just don't know where $8 billion end up. You know what I mean? So it's crazy. So I think that was one thing that we always try to be good at, like any and we almost challenge each other to say, at any given point I should be able to stop you and say, where are we right now in terms of MRR, and you should know the answer because that's kind of your job. So it takes discipline, it takes time. It's sometimes difficult to find that time when you're wearing so many hats and running in so many directions and you have so many fires that you have to keep putting up, but it's truly key, right? Because it becomes hard to see trends, right? The more you know, the more you're tracking, the slower things seem to be moving, and the easier it sort of seems for you to make those decisions. So I think in terms of recommendations, we used to schedule meetings, right? It's a simple thing, with whoever was managing the day to day from the money perspective. So initially it was my partner, and then we had other people that that started replacing us in some of these jobs, and spend the time looking and absorbing at the numbers, right? Like really getting through the questions and answers. And if you're not satisfied or you don't understand something, just stop, rewind, make sure you get it. And sometimes, people are not going to love it, but if you're the CEO, they're going to have to do it anyway. And, it's not pretty, but it's the only way I know. So how much are we spending? How what are the big ticket items? What commitments have we made that could become meaningful in the future, right? Like, are we going to be getting an invoice, a big invoice anytime soon that that we haven't discussed here, that we are not thinking about? How much money are we bringing in? Of course, what are the revenues coming up? How are we making sure that customers will renew, right? Because it's a different game when you're just selling new accounts than when you're actually renewing those accounts and avoiding churn, because that means that the customer is happy enough to want to renew.
Yep.
And that's a different set of skills, right? And again, you have to be really good at that. So do you have any big churn coming up that you need to know, right? About. So it's really, again, it's in know your stuff. It's just three simple words that actually make a huge difference.
Know your numbers, absolutely. So whenever I've gone into businesses and tried to understand what the unit economics of the business was and how the
Mm-hmm.
business really makes money, it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing, Emil, how many business owners can't tell me that. They think they know how the business makes money financially, but many times they don't. So how did you mentioned key metrics a number of times, right? So how did you discover the key metrics or performance indicators that you should focus on for the financial health of the business?
So, I mean, since we didn't invent SaaS, and there were very good thinkers out there, and people who were kind enough to share their knowledge, I think that made it a little easier, right? There were some proven models that helped really understand what your unit economics were, and sort of start looking for those and identify what those are, and make sure that you are constantly updating them, and measuring them and reviewing them and sharing them. So for us, the biggest ones, I mean, and there are different buckets, right? So from
Yes.
the growth perspective, right? So we're looking at MRR and ARR, so monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue. There are multiple components in our world for that. So because on MRR and ARR, you have different types of MRR. You have retained MRR, which means company, how much money are people spending in renewals, versus, for instance, expansion MRR. So you had an account with 10 customer with 10 users. Now they grew it to 15, which is a good day. Then you have net new sales, resurrected accounts, contraction accounts, churn accounts. So all of that plays into the MRR and ARR, and it typically requires different skill sets in the company to be able to manage all these different things, right? So you have customer success, trying to make sure that you are not only retaining accounts but also growing those, and product is involved in sort of learning what the users are saying and what the users need in order for you to build what they need to expand and renew and use more of the product as you go. Then compound monthly rates and compound yearly growth rates were important to us, right? How much are we growing, and at what pace are we really growing? So in SaaS, we used to see certain months of the year we were growing a lot faster than others, right? So when you say, yeah, we grew 50%, maybe you grew 50% in 12 months, but the vast majority of that growth actually happened in the last 3 or 4 months. So
Yep.
how do you know kind of what's going on? Customer concentration was another one that was important, particularly later on when we were trying to raise additional funding. So, understanding whether most of your revenues are coming from many small accounts or a few huge accounts, right? And like if you have one account that represents 50% of your revenue, that's risky, right? Because if you lose that account, then you're in trouble. And we had that situation in at some point, and it's tricky, right? We had just closed our biggest account ever, immediately you have good news, bad news. So good news, we have this huge client. Now we're getting the biggest paycheck we ever got. Awesome. Bad news, now you're overly concentrated in that customer because now he represents a lot of the big percentage. So it's kind of running with the punches a little bit as you go. I think then you have retention perspective sort of data, right? So your dollar retention, your net revenue retention, your NRR. So it's essentially measuring how much revenue a cohort is generating in each period relative to its original size. And what do you need to do to make that number be more than 100%? So hopefully they're expanding and not contracting as you go. Logo retention is a big thing for us. Like how many accounts are you keeping, and how many, regardless of how much you're spending or everything, how many accounts you actually have and you are keeping. Sales efficiency becomes extremely important as you start hiring more people and want to really professionalize your sales team. So things like your cost of acquisition becomes super important. They call it CAC. And what's the ratios, of course, of your LTV, your lifetime value of a customer versus how much you spend acquiring that customer, and all those things that everybody, I think, that is in this business knows or should know. Those are the big things that were really important to us as well. And then margin indicators obviously are important. What's the LTV, and being able to really know your LTVs was very critical. And then engagement and capital efficiency are also metrics that I think were important. So what's your average number of users per day, per month, per year? Are they really using the platform? That starts giving you clues, or whether you're going to be able to keep those customers when the contract ends. So there are a lot of numbers, right? And keeping track of everything can be challenging, because it's not like, especially back in the day, there weren't enough tools out there that would do all this math, especially for SaaS was pretty recent. So a lot of things we had to do manually. I think now there are more tools out there that are specifically designed for these types of businesses and do all the number crunching for you.
So it sounds, Emil, as though you had a culture of people knowing their numbers. What was your cadence on reporting? It sounds as though you've got the KPIs. So it sounds like you're not waiting for an income statement at the end of the month to find out where you're headed. You kind of knew during the course. So what was your cadence in reporting? Would you have daily metrics, weekly metrics? And then when you mentioned you have your team knowing their numbers, was that focused on an income statement, a cash flow statement? Just give us how you kind of manage the financial culture of the business.
So we had, depending on the teams, right? So if it was just management, we would have, our weekly management meetings, and we would just look at the key metrics, like, what are any potential issues with churn or new business that we're signing or getting closer to generate in that week or in those days, and just trying to prevent any big opportunities or explosions to hit us without knowing, right? So it wasn't super deep, but it was just essentially making sure that the salespeople were raising their hands and saying, hey, there is a chance that we're going to close this account, or there's a chance that we're going to lose this account. And then just essentially all the different teams sort of talking about what they're doing at that specific week to either generate more business, retain some of the business, or give us more opportunities to go after either bigger accounts or expansion of the same accounts, or even new sort of businesses that we weren't in before, right? So so we had big planning sessions for, and we had plans for the entire year, and then we had quarterly plans. And we had OKRs to sort of
Yeah.
give us the goals and people to understand how we measure success and what are the big hairy goals that we're trying to put out there. And in those quarterly reviews, then we're going a lot deeper. So I think we have weekly meetings with not a lot of depth, monthly meetings to just sort of see how we're preparing for a quarterly meeting, which also, was coincidentally the sequencing and the cadence for our board meetings. So we had quarterly board meetings. So we saw these monthly meetings as sort of preparation for our board meetings, and that was very helpful for us to sort of make sure that we were carving out time to sit down and look at things in a format that sort of gave us visibility of the big metrics and see, okay, there's no surprises here. We're tracking well. We're doing well. And then yearly, of course, is when we went really, really deep. So quarterly, we would make some adjustments if we saw that, for instance, we were getting too slow or too quick on certain things, and then we had to adjust so that 1 quarter or 2 quarters later on, we were not making mistakes, or we were avoiding situations that we didn't want to be in. So that's kind of what worked for us. Yeah, and then obviously at the end of the year, when you're having to talk to accountants and doing taxes and whatever, then that's the deepest level, of course, that we
and so your reporting cadence, I love the meeting cadence. That's fantastic. Typical kind of scaling up or traction type meetings, right? If you follow those methods, but so from a financial reporting standpoint, typical dashboards for KPIs, income statements, cash flow statements. I mean, was that the basic kind of package? Okay. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So it was, cash flow, income statement, P&L, and then always some sort of view on projected churn, projected sales, projected, so we would zoom in the different areas to sort of understand, where the opportunities were and where the risks were. I think there was a lot of depth on sales metrics, right? So that we could adjust quickly, like reading the funnel, right? And trying to stay on top of where in the funnel you are suboptimal at any given point, right? At some point it becomes pretty predictable and repeatable. And that's when you know that you have a business that you can actually grow. And you define the different stages in which your contracts, your average contracts actually is going to go from there, and it becomes pretty clear. And you start measuring, right, conversion from one step to the next in your funnel, and you start sort of seeing that in some months or some quarters something went wrong and something is off, and that gives you the chance to sort of ask yourself what changed, right? And what happened. And sometimes the answers are pretty straightforward, sometimes they're not, right? And you have to dig deeper and figure out, how do we know? It used to be 14%, now it's 8%. What happened? What went wrong? Was it a person that that left the company, or was it somebody who joined the company, or was it what was it? And that is sort of a CSI exercise, constantly on what happened.
I tell you, Emil, this is tremendous and I think you're a very, very humble man, because it sounds as though you've got a lot of financial discipline in your companies, with the right focus on certain metrics, key metrics and economics, and then of course, financial performance. So well done. I can see that. Now we've gotten into more depth. I think at the beginning you were being overly humble. This is fantastic. So look, I think one area that's always tough, particularly with non-financial, personnel, people, managers, whomever, is to communicate financial information to them effectively. Stakeholders, your staff, etc. So what strategies did you use to ensure that everyone's on the same page? And how did you effectively communicate financial information to these stakeholders?
Yeah, this is super important, and I'm glad you asked. You know, we could spend, you know, three more podcasts just talking about this, but I think it can get very tricky, right? And so I'll break it into smaller chunks, which, as you can tell by now, I tend to do. So I think we had shareholders on the board, right? And that's one level of communication, and one audience that, you know, that has more understanding typically, or at least in our case, of financial information and reading, you know, these kind of data. They don't need a lot of pretty graphics or anything. They need hard numbers, and they can read them well, and they would ask hard questions, and you got to be ready to answer, right? So with them, I think our philosophy was 100% transparency.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, is there any other way? But I don't think everybody is necessarily doing it
Right.
exactly 100% transparent, right? And even sometimes, you know, we talk about, if we're gonna err on the side of over communication as opposed to under, right? So and we explained that to them, and they were happy typically with that.
Yes.
So I say, you know, this meeting may take 10 more minutes, but we're going to make sure that you know where we stand. And I think that the logic for us was very simple, right? These especially with the board members, you want them to help you,
Yes.
right? And you want them to provide their wisdom. So it's almost impossible for them to provide that wisdom if you're not giving to them straight, right? And so it's easy when you have a good quarter, right? And when you have a good year and all the numbers are pointing up, then that's a piece of cake, right? There's no problems there. Anybody could do that. I can give my 15-year-old son, you know, the deck with all the numbers just pointing to the top right, and he'll do it, right? That's easy. Everybody's happy. We celebrate. But it's not always like that, right? You're going to have some quarters where you have bad news, some quarters where you have awful news, and you need to be more transparent and detail on those situations. That's my experience. That's what we found. So you know, we made sure that we explain also, and I think this is important, right? I've been in meetings now. I'm, you know, on the board of nonprofits, and I'm advising others that, you know, that are in where I used to be 12 years ago. And you know, I think one thing is, you don't come to me just with the problems, right? Just come to me if you had a rough quarter. Tell me, right? And show me what happened, and give me the details that are relevant, you know, to me as a board member, shareholder, to understand the situation. And then tell me, what are you doing about it? You know, what's the plan? You know, if you know how this happened, what are your, or at least what are your best guesses of why this is happening? And then what are you going to do about it? So I think that, again, seems super straightforward, super simple, but it's not always that simple, right? And sometimes you don't have the answers, and sometimes you have to say, I don't have the answers yet, but I would have the answers by this specific date, and then you definitely have to have it.
Tremendous
So
wisdom bite, Emil. Tremendous wisdom bite. Fabulous, fabulous, because you don't see that everywhere at all. So thank you for that.
yeah, no, I of course. And then you have communication with your team and with everybody in your company, and that's a totally different set of variables, right? And not everybody understands numbers the same way. There is a balancing act a little bit between making sure, in our case at least, that they know everything, right? That we also decided to be 100% transparent with our people, but we had to do it in a way that had enough context for them to understand what that meant, and hopefully not, not panic, too soon in a situation where we just had a bad quarter. But we are projecting a very good quarter next, and we have answers and we have good things also coming up. So that I think required more, more uh, ability to really communicate in an open way, and be open to be asked, tough questions by the team, and be, I think, having some empathy goes a long way. Like if you say, hey, if I was, I'm somebody that has a family and I have two kids and a wife, and I have expenses and a home and whatever, and we had a bad quarter, does this mean that I'm going to lose my job, or does this mean that, so what would I want to hear? What would I need to hear, in order to be okay? So definitely you wouldn't want to hear a lie, or some very optimistic version of something that is not real. So I think the end result of this is that we had very loyal team members, very active, culturally speaking, very active team members that felt like, that they were part of a company that respected them and that was giving it to them straight, for good and for bad, right? So I don't know if I have anything earth shattering to say around what we did, but I think that's what worked for us. Then we had partners, and with them it was very open also. Here's what we're going through, this is what's happening, these are challenges we're seeing, this is what we're doing about it, this is how you can help. And hopefully, the next meeting you have with them, it's a better one.
No, that's fantastic advice. You've covered it, because these are real values and principles. And also, thank you for that.
Sure.
Absolutely can shift the culture. Words can shift the culture, right? Depending on what you're saying. As you say, the context behind the numbers are very, very important, But no, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. So looking back, what do you think was the most valuable lesson you learned about finances that contributed to your business's profitability and overall success?
I think looking back, the biggest lesson for me was to spend the time, like really spend the time to identify as quickly as I could and as early as I could what our unit economics were, and then be disciplined and consistent with maintaining the data and tracking it almost obsessively, right? Because that's sort of your heartbeat. And if you have a relaxed, constant heartbeat, then you're going to be alive, right? And if not, if you don't even know, then you can get sick very quickly and not even know, and that's it, right? So I think for us, keeping that beat and understanding that beat was very important. And otherwise, you just have no real sort of frame of reference to identify potential issues or opportunities, right? Or even understand how much closer or farther you are from where you are trying to be, for your where you're trying to go. So I was very bad at this, don't get me wrong, at the beginning, right? So it took me a while to even understand what unit economics were and how do you figure those out, right? But then understanding the concept and saying, okay, is the account the unit, or is it the contract the unit, or is it the end user the unit, and managing it from there became an important stuff. So, but it all comes back to knowing your stuff, right? And spending the time and knowing that that's your job. Like it is, gonna make you better. So keep in mind that, before you're in a position to be profitable or successful, you'll spend much time or a lot of time just making sure that you can survive, and live to see another day. And so it's a tough reality for first time entrepreneurs, right? And I think one has to sort of understand that, right? And be ready for that kind of crazy ride. But it is what it is, right? So I think that I heard recently the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, he was saying that entrepreneurs are kind of a weird breed, right? Because they don't ask themselves, or they don't say to themselves, this is going to be so hard, right? But they say, how hard can this be? And that's
Very
what's
true.
so that's what sort of keeps us going. I think that he did an excellent job at sort of expressing that, because that's exactly how it feels, right? Now in hindsight, if I had known, if I knew, back then everything I know now, I don't know if I would even start it, right? Because it gets hard, it gets painful sometimes. So I think he explained it in a way that I think is the best I've heard.
That's right. But I tell you, Emma, you're hitting on such an important point about unit economics. Again, my history and scar tissue, it's, again, looking at financial performance is just an accumulation of unit economics. And so when you really understand how the business makes money at that most grassroots, lowest level, you can do something about it. You can pull levers, you can make changes, but you have to know the unit economics. And that was my earlier point about going in many, many businesses, and founders, entrepreneurs, even up to the board, don't even know unit economics. They'll look at a financial
Mhm.
statement and they'll try to diagnose a business with a financial statement. Okay, you can get only so far. But when you know your economics and you know you know, what levers to pull there, you can affect your business. Awesome.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Awesome. Okay. Managing expenses is essential to profitability. Can you provide some strategies that you employ to control costs without compromising on quality or growth potential?
Yeah. So yeah, again, another topic that we could spend weeks on, even just talking about the mistakes I made early on, right? So it's interesting, right? Because managing expenses is really important, and a lot of people, even myself at the beginning, confuse managing expenses with being cheap, right? Or cutting corners,
Right.
which is actually not at all what it is, right?
Right.
So some critical decisions for us, had to do with location, for instance, right? We like I mentioned before, we were in Silicon Valley. We identified that it would cost too much to grow there. We would have to raise a ton of money. We would have to, uh, sacrifice a lot of equity in order to do that. And so we look for other options to be nimble, to be able to have more people for the same kind of cost without having to raise a ton of money. So I think we always kept things kind of logical. So knowing the facts, but also sort of making decisions based on what we thought was sort of common sense. um, but even then, later when we became successful or somewhat successful, right, when we were not struggling anymore, I was still flying coach, and I was still being, smart about saying affordable hotels, and we never had the T&E expenses and crazy bottles of Cristal because we closed the deal. That's not the culture we ever had, right? And that also has to do with the culture around managing expenses, right? Like, you lead by example. If you don't do it, others are less likely to potentially do it. And then keeping good communication with our team was key, right? And everybody knew what to expect, and where to focus. And once we made those decisions and we had the right plans in place, just let them run with it and let them, spend the money the way we sort of agreed, without being too constrained by having to go through you for everything, right? And that's also not easy. It's your baby, and at some point you have to let go, right? And you're super concerned about every dollar that goes in and out. But if you've hired the right people, then it will work.
Unbelievable. Fantastic. A big, as you said, big topic as well, Emil, cost consciousness and managing costs, not
Mhm.
necessarily cost cutting, as you mentioned. Okay. So investing in the right areas of business is critical. How did you determine where to allocate resources for maximum impact? And were there any specific metrics or indicators you relied on?
Yeah, so like I said before, for us, it was relatively simple, especially at the beginning. We needed product and sales. So we, we from the beginning, we started sort of keeping an eye on the percentages, right? How much are we spending on product and how much are we spending in sales? And we sort of, Peter was really good at sort of trying to define a path on how these proportions had to evolve in time. So at some point when we reach certain thresholds, then product should have gone a little down, a little down compared to marketing and sales and customer success and support and other areas, right? So we're not overly um concentrating on just product, and then we don't have anybody selling all that product. So that was very important. But at the beginning, again, if you don't have a great product, then nothing else really matters, for the most part, right? Even if you have great salespeople in this kind of business where people have to renew, yeah, you'll get a customer, you'll fool them into being a customer once, but that's it. They're not going to renew, and the word in this industry, word spreads pretty quickly. So some metrics we had, were at the beginning were mainly tied to product, like I mentioned before, velocity, capacity, and then important KPIs that had to do also with customer satisfaction and what are the things that are working and not working, so that you're sort of being efficient and only building and focusing your team on the things that matter. Extremely hard thing to do, although it sounds super obvious. It is not easy to know what's the thing that you need to concentrate on. Is it the next big thing, or is it the boring thing that everybody's using today and that could really kill your business next month, right? So we wanted to correlate the roadmap requirements with the capacity needed to develop those features and be able to sell those things. Then obviously then support becomes a big thing. So are you doing customer support in-house? Are you outsourcing it, and to what degree? And that was interesting also. We ended up having our own team in-house. We found that they just cared more, and people loved our support just by virtue of our people really caring about what we did, and that was a key differentiator for us. And then you have customer success, and those metrics became very important as well, for retention, for expansion, for keeping everybody happy. So nothing really crazy that no one else in this business does. Just sort of the key areas that were critical, were we're evolving in time. So first product, then sales, then support and success, and you go, right? That was kind of the journey for
Got it.
us.
Okay. All right. Last two questions. These are more on the lessons learned, Emil. This has been superb. I mean, what a journey. And I love the way you've categorized the conversation in terms of life cycle of your business. It's absolutely superb. So as you learned about finances of the business, did you encounter any financial mistakes or setbacks? And can you share any of those valuable lessons?
I was lucky enough to really, not have any big sort of setbacks or big problems, right? I would say, we made a huge mistake, right? I made a ton of mistakes as a CEO in not, but not specifically in finance. I think most of the mistakes were just miscalculations and being overly confident about something that we were wrong about, like how many customers are going to be buying and how quickly. That is very easy to get it wrong. Then, always sort of thinking that you're going to get the money sooner than you actually are. And that's something that I would advise anybody in that position to just assume that it's going to take a lot longer, raise more money if you can. Don't go crazy though. I mean, don't raise stupid amounts of money. Money is not free, right? That's gonna come, bite you later on. But so I don't think we had, because we were sort of paranoid about being on a straight line, and we had agreed on being very judicious. We could get creative and we could get aggressive with other parts of the business, but keeping our records and doing a good, being judicious with how we spend and how we told people about what we spent the money on. I think that was kind of a blessing from the beginning, and we avoided a lot of potential difficulties later on, even down the road when we got acquired, like the due diligence process and whatever wasn't as terrifying as I know it can be for many others, right? So we had our house in order, and that was key. I think we hired also the right set of professionals around us to keep us, efficient and honest and good. So the combination of all those things sort of prevented, I think, what could have been potentially mistakes.
Again, brilliant, brilliant advice, Emil. Thank you for sharing that. So finally, Emil, what advice would you give to other non-financial entrepreneurs who are on their journey to understanding and managing finances in their business?
I mean, I would start with with saying not everybody has to be entrepreneur. No, it's not like if you're not a founder, then you're not good. It's not for everybody. And I think the media makes it seem like a super cool and sexy thing to do, but it's hard and it's painful sometimes, right? So I think the first thing I would say, which is not strictly financial, but it ends up, being reflected in your finances, is make sure that you're getting on this ride for the right reasons, right? That you're not just saying, hey, I'm the next Elon Musk and I want to be like that guy, and therefore I'm just going to start a business, because it will be painful and chances are you're never going to be like Elon Musk, right? So you got to be in it for the right reasons. So I think check yourself against the odds and make sure that you're good with that, right? And that most likely you're going to fail a couple times. And I think there is also this concept of failure is good, and that is definitely the case, but it doesn't feel like that at all when you're the one failing, right? So failure is good. After 10 years that you fail, and you kind of see in perspective what it gave you as learnings and whatever. But failure is not that good when you're the one feeling it, right? So whereas I agree with the concept that's sort of what doesn't kill you make you stronger in the long run. It sucks when you're really in it at that time. So, keep that in mind if you're starting a new business, that do it because you really have the passion. You really couldn't do something else that really would make you happier. And I think general pieces of advice, things that proved to be critical for me. Partner with the right person, number one, and for the right reasons, right? So look for somebody who may not look or feel like your friend, but who is perfect for what you need. And if you're able to identify what is it that you need and be honest enough with yourself to say, these are things that I'm not good at, right? It's a long, really tough journey to go on your own. So having a partner, I think is a great thing. But you gotta be smart at choosing who that person is, because you're gonna face most likely very hard times. And the sum of the two of you, and this is gonna sound super cheesy, but the sum of you has to be bigger than just you two individually, right? That was the case for me. I consider myself extremely lucky. I come from a mix of Latin America and Italian cultures where we're more trained to not trust, in business. It's like somebody's gonna screw you and if you are not paying attention. And I definitely came in a little bit with that sort of old school mentality that I grew up with. And in my case, I always found Peter to be so smart around the proposals that he was making, how we were going to do things and how we were going to work together, that I feel extremely lucky to have found somebody I could trust the way I do with him, because I think that's a key to success, right? If you cannot trust your partners, and and he cannot trust you, then it's very, very hard to go through this journey. So if you're like me, starting without a strong financial background, prepare to study hard. Assume that that's job number one for you, together with sort of driving the right culture. Spend the time to truly understand how things work, and what's really important and what's not, and differentiate facts from sort of noise. I think that was an interesting thing as well, right? And I remember one of the first meetings I had when I moved to Silicon Valley. A Stanford professor, that I met, he said, just make sure that you're not standing too close to the Silicon Valley BS, because there is such a thing, right? Where everybody's just talking about, they just want to be on TechCrunch, and they want to be on this magazine, that magazine, and that's definitely not what this is about. So make sure that you can tell fiction from true and from real value, and just stay convinced that you can get there with time and effort, right? And there's a lot of things that you don't know, and that's okay. I used to freak out a lot. I carried this sort of imposter syndrome, time and time again. I'm not the guy that you would have expected to see running a legal tech company and managing contracts for huge corporations in America, right? So that I think I had to compensate for a lot of the things that I didn't know by studying hard and working really hard. And then try to develop good habits from the get-go. I think that's really what it comes down to. And financial reviews, planning sessions, recurring meetings with key stakeholders, things that you don't push out for almost any reason, right? You got to be really sick for you to miss your financial review. And nobody's allowed to just leave early or be on their phones while you're looking at numbers, right? So that kind of discipline makes a difference. And just don't let yourself in your comfort zone for too long. It gets harder with time. If you don't do the homework early on, it will catch up with you and become much harder. It's like losing weight, right? It gets harder with time and with with more weight. So do your training, do your homework early on. So that I think would be my recommendation. And I think, obviously, if you have the passion, if you really believe in what you're doing, and you really cannot not do what you do, all the pains and all the things will just you'll realize them later on, but while you're there, it will be exhilarating and it would be fun, right? So yeah, so just go with it.
That is awesome. Wow, Emily, this has been a treasure trove of wisdom bites. I mean, you're a very, very humble human being. I can tell you started off, with a non-financial entrepreneur, but the wisdom bites all from, beginning from, raising money and stewardship and custodialship, matching revenue with your costs, understanding how you manage cash flow, understanding the unit economics of your business, and then establishing the right financial discipline in your culture. Simply superb. Really well done. Really nicely done, Emil. Thank you so much for that. I think there's a lot for founders, entrepreneurs, business people, even up to the board, can learn from your wisdom bites. So thank you very much. It's been superb.
Thank you, Richard, for for this opportunity and for asking all these interesting questions, and for making me think about what it takes. It's always good to sort of go back in time, and especially now that I'm going at it again, I still feel like there's so many things that I need to do better this time around, right? Like I need to make sure that I'm not putting myself through some of those hoops, because I should know by now, right?
It is, no, it's fantastic, and I know, Emil, you're a constant learner, so you'll do well whatever you put your hands on, I'm sure. All the best now, Emil.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for that. Okay.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it, and looking forward to learning more from your podcast, and from what others have done. So looking forward to that.
Thank you so much, Emil. Thank you.